Notably, this information was not super sexy. You're like, Mary, but I wanted to know, how do I get rich super quickly? Well, if you want to get scammed, feel free to Google that. Hi, my name is Mary, and while I am not uber wealthy myself, because of my job, I do spend a lot of time with people who I would consider uber wealthy, and let's call that like $20 million and plus in net worth. And at first, I was really hesitant to make this video because I am not trying to promote our society's really rampant obsession with money and certain individuals being super rich. But I do think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of opacity around like, how do people build true wealth? And so I've come up with these 5 steps that A, apply to everybody regardless of where you are in your financial journey, and B, I hope explain how some people actually like build true wealth. Okay, so step 1 out of 5, which is the most foundational step, is having a strong education as well as network. So when it comes to education, I mean a few things. The first is actually being educated about how you handle money or personal finance. Unfortunately, this isn't rarely taught in schools, it's mostly taught through families, but nowadays you can also find a ton of information online about personal finance, and that is very important when it comes to becoming wealthy in the long run. The other thing is essentially being able to think critically and trust in yourself and your decision-making skills. That is a very important foundation of being able to build wealth. And then finally, it's actually having differentiated skills that people will pay you for such that you can have an income. When I say this, I don't necessarily just mean like hard skills like computer science or like electrical engineering or something like that, but you could be really knowledgeable about tomato plants, or you could be an amazing dancer, or just some set of differentiated skills that people are willing to pay you for such that you have an income, such that you can start building wealth. When it comes to network, this is, I think, really undervalued, but it is really true that you are like the sum of the 5 closest people around you, which is why having a network, having a strong network is very important. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is that doesn't mean that if you're not friends with like elite society or something, that's a horrible thing. The people in your network should be based on the values that you hold. So for example, if you really value kindness in people, if you really value empathy in people, then having A+ people with those qualities be your friends will be infinitely important and foundational for building a good life. Okay, so step 2 of 5 is being able to earn money. You'll note that there are a lot of personal finance videos about like budgeting and debt, and all of that stuff is super important, but note that its effectiveness in building wealth is capped by how much money you earn. So for example, if you save a huge percentage of your income, but you make a very, very low income, it's still nevertheless going to cap how much wealth you can build, which is why earning income is important. The second thing I would say here, again, is if you invest in yourself and invest having differentiated skills, that will eventually help you earn a larger income. Again, doesn't have to be like investment banking or anything so specific like that, but just having differentiated skills that people will pay you for. And finally, when it comes to how you earn income, you'll notice that people who are really, really, really wealthy often own things. And that's just because kind of regardless of how much you get paid, like let's say you get paid a 6-figure salary, like over $100K a year, the math doesn't check out to go from $100K to $20 million in your lifetime. It just essentially doesn't. Which is why if you own a business, let's say you own 50% of a business, businesses are often worth a lot more than individual salaries can be. So a business, let's say, can be worth $10 million and you own 50% of it. Well, that's how you got $5 million. That is a very, very common method by which wealthy people have become wealthy. So step 3 is to save money. Now, you'll be amazed and shocked and horrified by how many people make a lot of money and then spend all of their money such that they are actually living paycheck to paycheck. Building the habit of saving a percentage of your income towards these future financial goals is an extremely, extremely important habit for building wealth. Now, something really interesting is that, Chinese people have, as a whole, I think, a very strong culture of saving money, but not all Chinese people are super wealthy. Now, why is that? That is because saving is not enough. That's why you need steps 4 and 5. But let me demonstrate why saving is not enough. Let's say you make 100K a year for 25 years and you retire at 65. At the end of that time, if you do not invest or do other things with your money, you will have less than $1 million. And because of inflation, you will actually lose like 3% or more nowadays in terms of your actual purchasing power, or how much that money is actually worth, and how much you can actually spend and buy with it over that time. So as you can see, like, how is it possible that someone we're making 6 figures over 25 years doesn't have enough money for retirement? That's because they haven't done steps 4 and 5, which is what we're gonna get to. Okay, we are now on to step 4, which is invest, and also probably the most important step. Importantly though, you need to have gone through the other 3 steps in order to be able to do step 4 correctly and effectively. If you are not in a strong financial situation and someone comes up to you and is like, buy this cool new cryptocurrency, it's gonna 1000x in like the next week or something, you probably don't have a strong enough foundation to actually make an intelligent investment, and this is also probably a scam. So that's why I'm warning, there's actually an order to these steps, and the order matters because you're building foundations for a wealthy life. Now, when it comes to investing, I can make like tons of videos about this, but I think the list from like easiest or most beginner friendly to most complicated goes something like this. The first is you have target funds that essentially say, I want to retire in like 2050 or something like that. And I don't know what you're investing in, but you're going to invest in a diversified portfolio of index funds, which are passively managed, which means it's not individual people picking stocks, but rather kind of algorithms that pick stocks, and have a very low expense ratio. And I'm not going to look at it, but I'm going to grow my money and let that grow over many years. That, I think, is the easiest entry point. The step above that would be if you were to pick index funds yourself. So for example, you have the S&P 500 index fund, which is the most popular, which tracks the top 500 biggest companies in the US and buys them in the percentage that they occupy that list. It does it automatically. Most of these have a very, very low expense ratio. And you personally might say, I want to invest in this index fund, and I also want to invest in an index fund of Asia and one of Europe or whatever. Like, you can come up with your own pool or portfolio. The next step on this list, if you want to be more risky or if you're more comfortable with investing, is picking individual stocks. From there, you might, once again, as you become more financially literate and more comfortable with investing, you might invest in derivative products like options or futures if you start to understand what that is. And then you might invest in other types of assets beyond stocks. So for example, you might invest in real estate. And if you go past all of this, you then start investing in alternatives, which is what a lot of really wealthy people do. They have a very diversified portfolio across all sorts of assets. So other types of assets that wealthy people may have is they may have, farmland. They may invest in private equity firms, which essentially often invest and get returns from small businesses across the world. They might invest in venture capital, which invests in startups, hoping that they become big companies. They might become angel investors, which means they put small checks into companies super duper early on in hopes that they become big companies. They might invest in films. They might invest in art. They might invest in wine. They might invest in a whole variety of these alternative assets that are available to people, usually with quite a high net worth. At minimum, I would say $1 million, but like most of these good opportunities actually are given to people with, let's say, 10 million plus in net worth. Now, an important thing to note is that another reason as to why your network really matters is because you hear about these opportunities through your network. So wealthy people will talk to their friends who are investing in various things and exchange information this way. But if you are not uber wealthy, like myself, you might get a lot of bad information about, oh, invest in this like cool cryptocurrency or invest in this thing or this asset that you might not really understand. And that is something that you have to be super duper duper careful about. By the way, just because I'm picking on crypto doesn't mean I think crypto is a scam. It just is often very scammy, or there's a lot of scams within it. And so I'm just telling people to be extra safe about that. But okay, we are on to step 5, which is leverage. A Harvard Business School professor once told me, and it really stuck with me, that the most important thing that you should learn from his finance class was leverage, because leverage gives you the right to own assets you previously had no right to. Now, the easiest example of leverage is if you think about a mortgage for a house. Let's say you're trying to buy a $500K house, you put $50K down and you borrow $450, and now you get this house. That's an example of leverage because you didn't have that money in full to be able to buy that house, so you technically had no right to the asset, but you're living in this house, you own this asset because you used leverage. That is the power of it. Note that the reason the bank makes money or is willing to lend you that money is because they get interest payments from you, which are, let's say, like 3 to 5% a year over the lifetime of the house. That's why they're willing to lend you the money. But the power of leverage is to take assets that you have and multiply it by multiple fold into assets you really had no right to own, but suddenly you get the ability to own because of leverage. So for example, let's say you have $1 million of net worth, maybe use that for collateral, you take on some debt, and then you're able to buy an almond farm that returns 11% a year or something. That is the last step of how wealthy people take their money and make more money out of it. Notably, this information was not super sexy. You're like, Mary, but I wanted to know, how do I get rich super quickly? Well, if you want to get scammed, feel free to Google that. But this, I think, is actually a very accurate framework for how people become really wealthy. They get educated, they have a good network, they earn money, they know how to save that money, they know how to invest that money, and then finally, they leverage that money in order to get more assets. That is actually how people become wealthy, I think, in a very transparent manner. And yeah, within this, there's a lot of information that I'd love to break down around, debt and budgeting and credit cards and leverage and things like that. And I'll talk about that in future videos, which is why you should like, comment, and subscribe. Okay, cool. See you in my next video.